So finally, the Las Vegas Raiders broke their 10-loss streak and defeated the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, as we know, their season has already ended, and they are already preparing for the upcoming draft. Let's break down what this means for the Raiders. For most fans, the concern with any win at this point in the season is the impact on the team's draft position. It's true, every victory means a lower spot in the draft order. Still some positives to take away. What's up, buddies? Welcome back. If you are new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We cover all AFC West news here on this channel. First, let's focus on this game. The Raiders came out strong and largely controlled the game from start to finish. There was a brief moment when it seemed like the momentum might shift. Late in the game, the Raiders held a 6-point lead when Daniel Carlson attempted a field goal that could have made it a 2-possession game. Unfortunately, he missed. Just a few plays later, Jack Jones was beaten for a huge touchdown, with Brian Thomas Jr. scoring on a play of roughly 60 yards. That gave the Jaguars a 14-13 lead, and it felt like the tide was turning against the Raiders. However, Aidan O'Connell responded immediately. On the next drive, he led the Raiders straight down the field, reclaiming the lead. The Raiders ultimately sealed the victory, 19-14. Despite the frustrations around the draft implications, there were some positives. Aidan O'Connell showed noticeable improvement, particularly with his mobility. Antonio Pierce even commented on it, admitting he was surprised to see O'Connell making plays with his legs. It's something we haven't seen much from him before, but it's clear he's getting more comfortable and confident as the season progresses. It seems like Aidan O'Connell played this game with something to prove. He might be looking ahead, knowing that if the Raiders draft a quarterback this year, his role could shift to being a backup. That motivation showed on the field as he delivered a solid performance and helped secure the win. His mobility and decision-making were noticeably better, which added another layer to his game. On the receiving end, Brock Bowers stood out once again, proving to be a key playmaker with 11 catches for 99 yards. He also crossed the 1,000-yard mark for the season. However, the wide receivers didn't have the same impact. Both Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker managed only 2 catches each for 41 yards, which isn't ideal. The offense seems heavily reliant on the quick game, with passes frequently going to tight ends or running backs out of the backfield rather than pushing the ball downfield. There was one standout week where O'Connell showcased his ability to air it out. But since then, the offense has leaned more conservatively. That said, under Scott Turner, the offense has shown improvement overall. While the points per game might not reflect a significant change, the team's movement on the field and overall execution have been noticeably better. The challenges with offensive production can't be ignored, especially considering the mid-season firing of the offensive coordinator. Installing and adjusting to a new system mid-season is tough for any team, and the Raiders are no exception. For context, the Chicago Bears are a good example of how difficult it can be to maintain consistency after making a similar move. Despite the hurdles, Turner's adjustments seem to have helped the team create more opportunities to move the ball effectively. Even though yards don't always tell the full story, they do provide some context here. The Raiders have been able to sustain drives more effectively in recent weeks, which is a positive sign as they head into the final stretch of the season. The run game was serviceable but not particularly strong. With Sincere McCormick sidelined due to injury, Amir Abdullah stepped up with 7 carries, while Alexander Madison led with 12. Even Trey Tucker got a shot on an end-around, though that play didn't yield much for the Raiders. Ultimately, the offense did just enough to secure the win. Defensively, the Raiders were outstanding. It's fair to say the defense has been the backbone of the team, keeping them competitive in many games. Isaiah Pola-Mao had a stellar performance, forcing 2 fumbles and solidifying his role as an enforcer. While his coverage skills may not be elite, his physical presence has been a big asset to the team. Players like Robert Spillane, K. Lavon Chaisson, and Adam Butler also made significant impacts. Butler in particular stood out as arguably the best healthy player on the defense right now. His contributions, while not always reflected on the stat sheet, were pivotal. For instance, while Chaisson officially recorded a sack, it was Butler's pressure that forced the quarterback to move, setting up the play. Additionally, Butler caused 2 holding penalties against the Jaguars center, who hadn't committed any penalties all season until this game. These kinds of contributions often fly under the radar, but Butler's performance has been crucial to the Raiders' defensive success. On the other hand, there are areas where improvement is needed, and the situation with players like Jack Jones raises questions. Giving Jack Jones another year to develop might be the right move, but his performance has been a concern. He's consistently been beaten on key plays, which raises questions. That said, it's worth considering if defensive coordinator Patrick Graham's scheme is part of the issue. If Jones is being told to play aggressively in certain situations, baiting quarterbacks or jumping routes, it could lead to vulnerabilities. Opposing quarterbacks often exploit this with double moves, and the inconsistency might be more about the system than the player. Despite these issues, the Raiders' secondary has been solid overall this year, with opposing quarterbacks struggling more often than not. If Jack Jones can clean up his mistakes and find more consistency, there's hope for improvement heading into next season. Now, let's shift gears to what everyone's really talking about, the draft implications of this win. To be completely honest, no one wasn't rooting for the Raiders to win this game. While it's always nice to see the team come out on top, winning at this stage of the season doesn't do much for the bigger picture. With just 2 games left and no shot at the playoffs, victories like this only hurt the team's draft position, and the Raiders need to get the upcoming draft right, especially when it comes to securing a franchise quarterback. If the Raiders already had a quarterback locked in under contract, dropping from the #1 pick to the 6th wouldn't be as significant. But that's not the case here. The team doesn't have a clear answer at quarterback, and this year's draft class isn't particularly strong. Missing out on a top-tier prospect could set the team back even further. Aidan O'Connell and Gardner Minshew might be serviceable, but neither seems like the long-term solution. With the 2 quarterbacks the Raiders have been working with this year, it seems likely that next season will look very similar unless major changes are made. If Aidan O'Connell and Gardner Minshew remain the top options, it's crucial that the team commits to O'Connell as the primary quarterback moving forward. He's shown flashes of potential, and giving him a full season could provide some clarity. Now, the win against Jacksonville has significantly impacted the team's draft position, dropping them from the #1 overall pick to 6th. This is a tough pill to swallow. The top 2 quarterback prospects, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, are likely to be taken within the first 3 or 4 picks, depending on which teams prioritize quarterbacks. The problem for the Raiders lies in their strength of schedule. Because they play in a division with 3 playoff-caliber teams, their strength of schedule is much higher than teams like the Jaguars or Titans, who play in weaker divisions. This puts the Raiders at a disadvantage when tiebreakers come into play. Currently, they're tied with 5 other teams with 3 wins, but due to their strength of schedule, they're picking last among those teams. Teams like the Giants, Titans, and Browns, who also need quarterbacks, are all positioned ahead of the Raiders in the draft order. If the Raiders win another game, they could fall even further, with the Jets and possibly the Saints jumping ahead as well. This would push the Raiders' draft position to 10th, with potentially 6 quarterback-needy teams ahead of them. This kind of slide would make it incredibly difficult for the Raiders to secure a top quarterback prospect without trading up. With 2 games remaining in the season, the Raiders' draft position still has a slim chance to improve, depending on how other teams perform. Teams like the Jaguars, Titans, Giants, or Patriots could win their next games, which might help the Raiders climb higher in the draft order. However, the Raiders face the Saints and Chargers in their final 2 matchups. The Saints are likely to be without Derek Carr and Alvin Kamara, and the Chargers, while playing for a playoff spot, aren't exactly dominating opponents this season. There's a realistic chance the Raiders could win both games, which would further damage their draft position. Tom Telesco has a reputation for being conservative in his draft strategy, rarely trading up. If the Raiders stay at the 6th pick, it raises questions about who they would select. The pool of talent in this draft class doesn't provide clear answers for the Raiders' needs. Offensive tackle prospects like Will Campbell are being projected more as guards, and top talents like Kelvin Banks Jr. and Josh Connerly Jr. might return to school. Even in other positions, the options are uncertain. If the Raiders don't trade up for a quarterback, other options, like drafting a defensive end, might not make sense, given the depth already in place with players like Malcolm Kuntz, Kalavan Chisson, and Max Crosby. Suggestions like Travis Hunter are enticing, but he's expected to go first overall or in the top few picks, far out of reach unless the Raiders make a bold move. There are still plenty of directions the Raiders could take in the draft, but it's a tricky situation. Selecting a cornerback like Will Johnson could make sense, as it would strengthen the defense significantly. Alternatively, they might look at wide receiver options like Luther Burden III or Tetaroa McMillan, who could add firepower to the offense. For now, the focus should be on wrapping up the season and preparing for what's next. While many fans are disappointed by the recent win, there's at least one positive takeaway. Winning could benefit the team's culture. If Antonio Pierce is going to return as head coach next year, finishing the season strong, especially with a big win over a divisional rival like the Chargers, could set the tone for the future. So, guys, what do you think? Do you think the Raiders should prioritize securing a franchise quarterback in the draft, even if it means trading up, or focus on strengthening other key positions like defense or wide receiver? With 2 games left in the season, would you rather see the Raiders finish strong with a couple more wins, or should they focus on preserving their draft position for a better long-term future? Let's spark the discussion in the comment section.